The crumpled envelope is still in my workshop, pinned to the wall above the bench, and most days I don't even notice it anymore. But that Father's Day I noticed everything. I noticed the way my daughter slid the cheap dollar store card across my kitchen table like she was dealing cards at the Legion. I noticed her laugh when she handed her father-in-law a cruise worth more than my truck. And I noticed later that the worthless patch of bush she'd signed over to me as a joke ended up being worth $5.5 million. She said if it was ever worth anything, half of it was hers. It turned out to be worth a great deal. She didn't get half. She got exactly what she'd earned, which was nothing, and I'd be lying if I told you I lost much sleep over it. Let me back up, though, because the money isn't really the story. The story is what a man finds out about his own kid when he stops giving and starts watching. I'm 68. I spent 41 years as a cabinet maker in a little town up in Muskoka, the kind of place where everybody knows whose truck is whose, and the hardware store still puts your tab on a clipboard behind the counter. My wife passed 9 years ago. Lorna, her name was. And after that it was just me and the dog and the shop out back. I built kitchens for cottagers who came up from Toronto every summer with more money than sense. Good, honest work. It never made me rich, but it kept the lights on. Kept my daughter in figure skating. Kept her in university down in London when she decided she wanted to be something more than her old man. And I was proud of that. I want to be clear, I was proud she went further than I did. That was the whole point. She married well, by the world's measure. My son-in-law came from a family that summered. That's the word they used, summered, like it was a verb you could afford. His father had built up a chain of physiotherapy clinics across southern Ontario and sold them for a number none of us were ever allowed to know exactly. Good people, I'd always thought. Quiet money. And for a while, everything was fine. My daughter and her husband bought a place in one of those new subdivisions outside the city, the kind where every third house is the same and they're all beige. They had my grandson. They came up for the long weekends and I'd take the boy out on the lake and teach him to cast a line the way I taught his mother. Somewhere in there, though, the visits got shorter and the eye rolls got longer. I'd mention something I built and she'd change the subject. I'd offer to drive down and help with something and she'd say her husband had already hired a guy. The cottage I dreamed about my whole life. 40 acres on a back lake my own father bought for a song in 1961. Scrubby bush with a tin roof camp on it that leaked. She started calling it the swamp. As in, Dad, when are you going to finally get rid of the swamp? I should have heard it then. I didn't. So, Father's Day. 2 years ago this June, I'd cleaned the house. I want you to picture this because it matters to me. I'd cleaned the whole house, vacuumed the Chesterfield, put out the good plates that were Lorna's mother's, made a roast, even though it was 26 degrees out, because my daughter once said as a girl that my roast was the best thing in the world. I bought a cake from the bakery in town. I set the table for 6, my daughter, my son-in-law, the boy, my sister Glenda, and my son-in-law's father, who'd been invited because that's what you do. You fold the in-laws in, you make room. They showed up an hour and a half late. My daughter breezed in carrying gift bags, tissue papers sticking out of the tops, and the first thing she did was wrinkle her nose at the roast and say, "Oh, Dad, in this heat." We got through dinner. The boy was sweet, asking me about the lake, and that part was good. Then came the gifts, and this is the part I've turned over in my head 1,000 times. She gave her father-in-law his first, made a whole production of it, stood up, cleared her throat, the works. Inside the bag was a folder, and inside the folder was a booking for a 14-night cruise through the Mediterranean. Balcony suite. She read the price out loud like it was an accomplishment of her own. 14.5, she said, because some people in this family deserve to be spoiled. My son-in-law's father, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He said it was too much. She shouldn't have. She waved him off. You've done so much for us, she said. This is nothing. Then she turned to me, and she reached into her purse, and she pulled out one of those cheap cards, a cartoon fish on the front, and tucked inside, it was a single folded sheet of paper. A printout, the deed to the bush lot. My father's 40 acres, the swamp, that I'd put in joint names with her years ago for estate reasons, the way you do, so it'd pass clean when I was gone. I had the lawyer move it fully over to you, she said, smirking. Happy Father's Day. Now it's officially all yours. The swamp and the camp and the black flies. She laughed, and my son-in-law laughed with her, and she added, If you ever do manage to sell that mosquito farm, though, I want my half, finder's fee. I'm the one who got it off the joint title for you. I held that folded paper, and I felt about 2 inches tall. $14,500 for a man she'd known 6 years. A photocopied deed and a joke for the man who raised her. Thoughtful, I said. I think I even smiled. I'm good at that, the smiling. 40 years of cottagers will teach you to smile while you're being insulted. My sister caught my eye across the table, and I could see she wanted to say something. But I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Not here. Not in front of the boy. They left around 8. My daughter hugged me at the door, a quick one, already half turned toward the car, and said, Don't be like that, Dad. It was just a joke. Lighten up. Then they were gone, and I stood in my kitchen with the roast half-eaten in Lorna's mother's plates and the cartoon fish on a card, and I told myself I was being sensitive. Old men get sensitive. I poured the rest of the gravy down the sink. It was 3 days later that I found out about the money. I do my banking the old way, on paper, at the kitchen table on the first of the month, the same way I've done it since I was 25. My pension, my CPP, my OAS, the little bit from the business I put away. I went down the list of charges the way I always do, and there it was, dated the Thursday before Father's Day. Coastline voyages, $14,500. I sat there a long time. I made myself a cup of tea and let it go cold, which is a thing I do when my hands need something to hold. Because I knew, even before I'd worked it all the way through, I knew. Years back, when Lorna got sick, I'd added my daughter to the account, in case I couldn't get to things, in case I ended up in the hospital and bills needed paying. I'd never taken her off. You don't think about it. It just sits there, that access, like an unlocked door you forgot about. She'd paid for her father-in-law's cruise with my money, and then she'd handed me a photocopy and a fish. I called her. I'll tell you. My voice was steady, which surprised me, because inside I was shaking like a man standing on thin ice hearing it crack. There's a charge on my account, I said. $14,500, a cruise company. A pause. Then that little laugh she's got, the one that means she's about to tell you you're overreacting. Oh, yeah. That was his cruise. You took $14,000 out of my account. Dad, I didn't take anything. It's family money. You weren't using it. And then, before I could even find the words, she said the thing that I keep coming back to. The thing that told me everything. It's not stealing if it's family. He's done a lot more for us than... And she stopped herself, but I heard where it was going. Then I finished for her. That's not what I said. Your mother and I worked double to put you through school, I said. I drove you to the rink at 5 in the morning for 11 years. And his dad bought us our first house, she snapped. So, that was the whole of it sitting in that one word. So, I told her that was theft, plain and simple. She told me I was being dramatic and that they'd pay it back when things settled, maybe by Christmas, and that I didn't need it anyway. What was I even spending money on? And then she hung up on me, and I stood there in my kitchen listening to the dead air. holding a phone that suddenly felt like it weighed 40 pounds, looking at the same chair my grandson had sat in 3 days before asking me how to tie a clinch knot. A text came 20 minutes later. I've still got it. I talked to him about it. He thinks you're overreacting too. It's not like you needed it for anything. We'll square up when we can. Don't make this weird at the next family thing. K? K. Like I was a coworker she was brushing off. Now here's where I think I started to come back to myself, and it's because of something an old buddy of mine said years ago. Retired OPP played euchre with us on Tuesdays before he passed. He used to say, "People show you who they are. The only mistake is making them say it twice." I didn't make her say it twice. The next morning I drove into town and I sat down across the desk from the woman at my branch. I've banked at the same credit union my whole adult life. Her name's nothing you'd know. And I told her plainly that there'd been an unauthorized charge and that I wanted my daughter's access removed from every account I held. She was kind about it. She walked me through disputing the cruise charge, said because it was a card transaction, there was a decent chance of getting at least part of it back, and she filed the paperwork right there. Took maybe 40 minutes. By the time I walked out into the parking lot, my daughter could no more touch my money than the man in the moon could. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. I felt like a man minding his own house. I went home and I'll be honest with you, I had every intention of dealing with the bush lot too. I figured I'd get the lawyer to put it in a will properly and be done with it. And I went out to the truck to dig the folded deed out of my jacket pocket where I'd shoved it Father's Day night. And I'll tell you what I almost did. I almost balled it up and pitched it in the burn barrel out back. The swamp. The joke. Oh, but I didn't. And I've thought about why. I think it was my father's hands. I was thinking about him standing on that shoreline in 1961 in his work pants telling my mother this was going to be where the grandkids learned to swim. I couldn't burn that, so instead I smoothed the page out on the tailgate and I read it properly for the first time, the legal description, the lot and concession numbers, and then I folded it back up and I put it in the kitchen drawer with the elastic bands and the spare keys, and I made my supper. And that, I figured, was the end of it. It was about 6 weeks later that the letter came. It came registered mail, which already had my stomach going because nobody sends a 68-year-old registered mail with good news. It was from a numbered company, one of those 2-something Ontario Inc. names with a Bay Street law firm's return address. I read it twice standing at the end of the driveway with the mailbox still open. They were assembling lakefront. The back lake my father bought into for nothing in 1961 had become, in the way these things go, the last undeveloped stretch of shoreline within 2 hours of the city, and a resort group had spent 3 years quietly buying up every parcel around it. Mine. 40 acres with close to a kilometer of frontage, the leaky camp, the swamp, was the keystone. Without it, the whole assembly didn't work. The letter was an offer, a real one, with a number in it. I had to sit down on the cooler in the garage. The number was $3.2 million. Now I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like one of those stories. But I want you to understand, this is just what waterfront does up here now. People sell a cottage their grandparents built for $100 and walk away millionaires, and it ruins half of them. I'd watched it happen to people I knew. I just never once imagined the swamp was that. I didn't tell anybody. Not my sister, not a soul. I called the lawyer in town that does my paperwork, and I said I'd had an offer on the lake property, and I'd like him to look it over before I so much as breathed on it. And here's the part where I caught a real break. He knew the file, knew the numbers cold, because 2 of his other clients had sold into the same assembly. And he told me flat out, don't take the first number. They need you more than you need them. So I didn't. I let him right back. And over about 3 months, with 2 phone calls and a great deal of patience on my part, that 3.2 became $5.5 million because it turned out a second developer wanted in. And once there's two of them at the table, an old swamp gets very valuable very fast. $5.5 million for the mosquito farm. I'd love to tell you I kept it quiet and went on with my life in peace. I tried to. But my son-in-law, see, he works in commercial real estate. And these deals, the closings, they go through registry and people in that world talk. He saw my name on something he had no business seeing, and within a day my daughter knew, and within 2 days she was in my driveway. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She came through the back door the way she had as a teenager, and she found me at the kitchen table, and her face, I'd never seen her face like that, lit up, hungry. "Dad," she said. "Dad, is it true?" I set down my coffee. "Is what true?" "The lake, the swamp. 5 million, 5.5?" She was almost laughing. "Oh my God, Dad, do you know what this means? Do you know what this changes for us?" "It changes things for me," I said. She didn't hear it. She kept going, talking fast about how they'd been so stressed, about how this was going to fix everything, and then she landed on it, light as anything. "And remember, I told you. Half's mine. I'm the one who got it off the joint title. We agreed." "We didn't agree to anything," I said. "You signed it over to me as a joke and laughed in front of the whole family." Her face changed then, the light going hard. "Don't be like this. Everyone at that table heard me say half was mine." "That's a verbal agreement, Dad. There are witnesses." I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her the way you look at a stranger trying to sell you something at the door. And I saw a woman whose first thought on hearing her old man had come into a little luck was how much of it she could get her hands on. Not, "I'm glad for you." Not, "After everything, you deserve a soft landing." Just, "Half's mine." "It was a gift," I said. "You said so yourself. You can't take back a gift." She stood up so fast, the chair scraped. "You're unbelievable. You're going to sit on $5 million and let your own daughter struggle? Your grandson? You'd do that?" "You took $14,000 out of my account to impress your husband's father," I said quietly, "and called me dramatic for noticing. I removed your access, by the way, the day after." That stopped her cold. I think that's the moment she understood the ground had shifted under her, that the soft old man who smiled while he got insulted wasn't sitting at this table anymore. She said a few things I won't repeat, things about how money had changed me, how I'd gotten cruel. And then she went out the back door the same way she came in, and her tires kicked gravel all the way down the drive. And then she did the thing I truly did not expect. She went online. I'm not on the computer much. My sister called me 2 days later and said, "Had you seen what she's putting out about you?" And I had her read it to me over the phone, and I'll tell you, sitting in my own kitchen listening to my sister read my daughter's words, that was as low as I got in the whole business. She'd written this long thing on Facebook about her poor struggling family and her wealthy father who'd come into a windfall and turned his back on his only child and grandson. She didn't mention the cruise. She didn't mention the $14,000. She made it sound like I was a miser sitting up north on a pile of gold while my grandson went without. And people believed it. That's the thing that got me. People I'd known for years hit like. Her husband's whole social circle weighed in about family values. Somebody who'd bought a kitchen from me wrote that he'd always seemed off about money. Off about money. The man who carried a clipboard tab and never once charged a widow full price. For about a week there, I felt like the loneliest man in Ontario. $5.5 million in the bank, or about to be, and I couldn't show my face at the Tim Hortons in town without conversations going quiet. My grandson, they'd stopped letting me call. I'd phone, and it'd go to voicemail. That was the cruelest part. They turned the boy into a hostage. And then the phone rang, and he was my son-in-law's father. I'll admit my stomach dropped when I heard his voice. because I figured he was calling to twist the knife, to tell me to do right by his son's family. I almost didn't take it, but he asked, very calm, if I'd meet him for coffee, not at any fancy place. He named the little diner on the main drag in town, the one with the laminated menus, which surprised me, because it wasn't his kind of spot at all. I said all right. He was already in a booth when I got there, in a golf shirt, no airs about him, 2 coffees already poured. And the first thing he said, before I'd even sat down all the way, was, I was at that dinner. On Father's Day. I saw the whole thing. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She handed you that deed, he said, and she called it your gift, and she laughed. There was no agreement about splitting anything. I was 3 feet away. It was a gift, full stop, and what she's doing now is a flat-out lie. He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, a thing I noticed because I do it too. And I'll tell you something else. She paid for my cruise with your money. I didn't know that at the time, or I'd have refused it on the spot. When I found out, I canceled it. I'm not going on a holiday paid for with a man's stolen retirement. I think I just stared at him. You're his father, I finally said. Why are you telling me this? And he looked out the diner window for a second, at the main street of a town that wasn't his, and he said, because I raised my son to have some integrity, and somewhere along the way he set it down and didn't pick it back up. And I'm not going to sit on my hands while the 2 of them ruin a decent man's name to cover their own mess. He pulled out his phone. I've already written something. I wanted you to see it before I post it. He'd written a statement, plain, no drama, that he'd been present at the gathering, that he'd witnessed his daughter-in-law present the property to her father as a Father's Day gift, with no conditions, that there had been no agreement of any kind about sharing any proceeds, that the property was the father's alone, and that he was ashamed to see members of his own family spreading falsehoods about a man who, in his words, had shown nothing but kindness and patience. He added that he'd declined the cruise upon learning how it had been paid for. You don't have to do this, I told him. He's your son. This'll cause you no end of grief at home. My son's a grown man, he said. Grief at home is what happens when you let people get away with things. I've let too much slide already. And he hit post right there at the diner table and slid the phone back in his pocket and asked me if I'd ever fished the back lakes up here. Because he'd heard the pickerel were something. That post went through that little corner of the internet like a snowplow. Because here was the wealthy, respected father of the husband, the man my daughter had been holding up as the family's golden standard, calling his own son and daughter-in-law liars in public, with specifics. The likes on her post curdled. The comments turned. People started asking her about the $14,000, about the cruise, about why the dad had to take her off his bank account. She took the whole thing down within a day. But you know how that goes. It was already screenshotted, already passed around. The story flipped clean over, and for once it landed right side up. The land deal closed that fall. I won't pretend the lawyers and the accountants weren't a headache, because they were. When you've spent your life with a paper ledger at the kitchen table, suddenly having people in suits talk to you about trusts and capital gains and holding companies is its own kind of vertigo. But it got done. $5.5 million, less what the government took, which was plenty, but still more money than my father and I together earned in 2 lifetimes of honest work. And about 3 weeks after it closed, my daughter came back. One more time. She didn't come through the back door this time. She knocked. Soft, almost like she was afraid of it. And when I opened up, she looked terrible. Not done up the way she always was. Her eyes red, wearing the same clothes 2 days running by the look of them. And the first thing out of her was, Dad, I'm so sorry, I was awful. I know I was awful. I let her in. Of course I let her in. She's my kid. I sat her down on the Chesterfield, Lorna's Chesterfield, and I made tea. because that's what my hands do, and I waited. It all came out then. They were losing the house. The husband's business had been bleeding money for 2 years, and they'd been papering over it. The leased cars, the club membership, my grandson's private school, all of it on credit, all of it underwater. They owed close to $400,000 they couldn't cover, and the bank had started the paperwork to take the house. She cried, telling me, real tears, or tears that looked real. And she said she'd never been so scared. And she reached across and put her hand on my knee the way she used to when she was small and wanted something. And she said, I just need help. One time. You have so much now. 2 million would fix everything. You'd still have millions left, Dad. It's nothing to you. $2 million. Delivered like she was asking to borrow the truck. And I want to tell you, the father and me wanted to do it. I won't lie about that. Some part of me will always be the man at the rink at 5 in the morning. That never fully leaves you. I sat there and I felt it pulling. But I'd learned the thing my euchre buddy tried to teach me. People show you who they are. And she'd shown me twice, 3 times more. The cruise, the family money, the the lies online, the hostage she'd made of my own grandson. And now, the first moment she needed me, here she was with her hand on my knee and a number already rehearsed. I've heard these promises my whole life, I said. Every time you wanted something, there were tears, and there was a number, and there was a promise it'd be the last time. Her face flickered. This is different. This is the house. This is Cody's future. You stole from me, I said gently as I could, and you lied about me to anyone who'd listen, and you stopped letting me talk to my grandson to punish me. And now you want me to hand you $2 million to make all of that go away. I shook my head. No, sweetheart. I love you. But no. And there it was. The mask came off. The tears stopped like a tap. The hand came off my knee, and she stood up, and she looked down at me, and she said, cold as the lake in November, you're going to die alone in this house, you know that. No grandkids at your funeral. Nobody, because you're a selfish old man. Maybe, I said. But I'll die an honest one. She left, and I sat there in the quiet for a long while, and I won't pretend it didn't hurt, because it cut me right to the bone. But underneath the hurt, there was something else I hadn't felt in years, and it took me a minute to name it. It was peace. The quiet in that house wasn't empty. It was clean. I didn't stay up north in the end. Too many whispers. Too many people who'd liked the post and never thought to take it back. I bought a place a couple of hours east, near a town where nobody knew me from Adam, and I did the one thing I dreamed about my whole working life. I bought an old shuttered cabinet shop with a good bench and better light, and I opened the doors again. Just me and 2 young fellows I took on as apprentices, because there's a whole generation now nobody ever taught to work with their hands. And I started a thing, small, nothing flashy, a fund through the local college that pays the tuition for kids who want to learn a trade and haven't got a parent who can swing it. Carpentry, plumbing, welding, the whole lot. I named it for my father, the man who bought a swamp in 1961. Because he wanted his grandkids to learn to swim. There's a plaque on the shop wall. It just says his name, and the year, and under it, honest work, honest people. My son-in-law's father and I, we fish now. 2, 3 times a summer he drives up, and we take my boat out on whatever back lake is holding pickerel, and we don't talk much, which is the best kind of friendship there is. His son and my daughter split up the year after the house went. I heard it from my sister. I didn't feel anything much hearing it. Just a kind of sad weather passing through. I don't hear from my daughter. Her number rings through to voicemail on my phone now, the same way mine used to ring through on hers. And I've made my peace with that being how it goes. But about a month ago, I got a letter. Real mail. Handwriting I didn't recognize. It was from my grandson. He's old enough now to have his own phone, old enough to remember a man who taught him to tie a clinch knot on a dock up north. He wanted to know if the offer to learn to fish still stood. I wrote him back the same day. Told him to bring a hat for the black flies. That folded-up deed is still pinned above my bench, the cartoon fish card too, gone soft and yellow at the corners. People ask me why I keep them. A grown man, a successful man now, hanging on to a dollar store card that was meant to put him in his place. And I tell them the truth. I keep them because they're the most valuable gift I ever got, even if she never meant them that way. They taught me what my money was worth, and they taught me what my daughter was worth, and they taught me, finally, in my 60s, what I was worth. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped up to look like garbage. And sometimes the swamp is worth more than the whole rest of the lake. I've had a lot of time out in that shop to think about how it all came apart, and the thing I keep landing on is this. None of it was bad luck. Every piece of it followed from something. My daughter didn't wake up one Father's Day and decide to be cruel. She got there one small permission at a time, and most of those permissions, if I'm honest with myself, I handed her. Every time I smiled while she dismissed me. Every time I told myself, she's just tired. She's just stressed. She didn't mean it. I was teaching her that there'd be no cost. You show a person there's no bill at the end and they'll keep ordering. The $14,000, the lies online, the hand on my knee asking for $2 million. Those weren't separate disasters. They were the same river, and I'd spent years digging the channel. The day things turned was the day I stopped pretending I couldn't see. That's the first thing I'd want a younger man to take from this. Being kind is not the same as letting people walk on you. And the kindest thing I ever did for my daughter, in the end, was tell her no and mean it. A backbone is a form of love. It just doesn't feel like it in the moment. The second thing is to keep your eyes open and your wits about you, because the world will hand you a swamp and call it worthless and laugh while it does. I almost burned that deed. If I had, I'd have torched $5.5 million in a rusty barrel, because I let her decide what a thing was worth instead of finding out for myself. So I slowed down. I called the lawyer. I let a man who knew the numbers tell me not to take the first offer. There's no shame in not knowing something. The shame is in being too proud to ask the person who does. And the last thing is the hardest, because it's the part nobody can do for you. When my own town went quiet on me. When the boy I taught to fish stopped taking my calls. When I had millions in the bank and felt like the loneliest man in Ontario. The only thing that got me through was simply refusing to fold. Not loudly. Not with revenge. Just getting up, making my tea, doing the next honest thing in front of me, and trusting that the truth would surface if I gave it room. It did. My son-in-law's father saw to that, because integrity in one person tends to call it out in another. I don't tell this story to make my daughter a villain. I tell it because somewhere out there is a parent smiling while they're being insulted at their own table, thinking that's what love costs. It isn't. Hold your ground, use your head, and don't let go of who you are, no matter what they pay you or take from you. The swamp was never worthless. Neither, it turned out, was the old man they all wrote off.